Matt. Matt has been teaching for the university sometimes in partner programs that we have, and has been helping in this case with Shauna's thesis. But I just enjoyed so much the times that we've been together. I just enjoy your perspective. So I'm so excited that you're here to speak with us today. This is Dr. Matt Downey.
Can I put this on the piano?
It's up to Tina.
Can she put that on the piano?
Oh, yeah. Never know.
I got in trouble for putting gloves on an altar in an Anglican church.
Good morning, all. It's been a long minute since I've been in a group inside, worshiping and gathering together. So it's good to be here. I'm just going to take a moment and take it in. So before we start, you can actually take that off if you want, because I won't be referencing it right away. The PowerPoint. Oh, that service, wow. So before we start, maybe we can just take a minute to do a breath prayer. And, I'm always busy thinking or doing or whatever, and sometimes it's just good to notice I'm in a moment right now and be very present. So if we could do a breath prayer together. And all it is simply that we say a prayer internally, where we take a breath in. I have one I can suggest for you, but there's others if you have something else. What I often do is I am with you when I breathe in, and you are with me. Whether that refers to God, or the people with us, or even myself, being present to myself. So if you want to do that with me, a few breaths. I am with you, and you are with me. And I'd like to add something from Jessica's poem, which is, God in the world, God in me. Yes, we'll do that one a few times too. So we welcome your presence here today. Creative and Holy Spirit, I ask you to breathe on us and in us, inspire us, teach us, nudge us, walk with us, breathe life into us, invigorate us. Let us know that we are not alone and never have been. Amen. So in Montreal, I am part of a group that meets weekly, only meeting online now. It's called Preaching Peace. And every week it's a group of preachers, so to speak, or people that regularly teach and preach. And we go through the lectionary, so we're always reading the lectionary for that Sunday. And then we discuss how would we preach this through the lens of peace. And but one of the people that joins us says it's always like all the sermon ideas are just given to you, and you just make something out of all these different what different people bring. But we start every meeting by writing a collect together, which is a prayer. And it begins with this question: who has God been for you this week? And it always makes me pause, like, who has God been for me this week? And it's different every week in many ways. And it gets us thinking beyond our go-tos for who God is or how we relate to God. So before we consider some things together, and I very much invite participation or feedback, even disagreement if you want, I don't know. But I want to ask you, who has God been for you this week, or these weeks, or this month, or maybe even these years? And I invite you to share with the group if you want to, and say, and tell us, who has God been for you? And I can prime the pump a bit. In weeks past, it's come up, well, God's been my comforter this week, or God's been a healer, or God's been a friend, a protector. God's been like the bright sun, or God's been like a shadow. Many things that God has been to us, maybe even an agitator in some ways. So, who has God been for you lately?
I think I have too many answers, but yesterday God was, the warmth of community gathered on the beach and the shelter from wind. And
Warmth from the community gathered on the beach, I'm just saying this, so, and shelter from the wind. Thank you. Anyone else want to share? You don't have to, we'd love to hear it if there's something that you can articulate. And if you just want to keep it to yourself, that's fine too. Sean?
I would say, torn between like a wool sweater or a wool blanket, but just this, again, this idea of warmth, but just protection too.
So Sean's saying a wool sweater, wool blanket, warmth and protection.
And comfort.
And comfort, yeah. Good.
The beautiful source of the shadow.
The source, beautiful source of a shadow.
You see a shadow, you don't.
Yes, you're seeing the shadow, but you know there's a
You
source.
don't really know what it is.
Yeah,
And then to see the source of that shadow and see the beauty of it.
yes, thank you. Lots of nuances in there. Yeah.
God's my rescuer and a fresh chance. I'm not going to say a second chance because we had multiple chances. Give you a fresh chance.
So rescuer and fresh chance. Over and over again, seems like. Always a fresh chance. Cool.
For me, he's been a defender in a place where I thought there was no such thing. A real defender. And I'm
defender.
thankful that
When there seemed to be a lack of that, a defender. Thank you.
For me yesterday, it was, God was present in friends. It came with it.
Present and friends, yeah.
God has been the reality of grief.
Reality of grief. Mhm. So before I go on, anyone else? Don't want to miss anyone?
Okay, it's just not fair to say this, but it's not possible for me not to. God is the one who helps underdogs, like Scotty Barnes from the Toronto Raptors, win Rookie of the Year.
You're probably God for
Shot by the underdogs in some sports ball reference. No, that's good. And I love the kind of variety and the different pictures that we're getting by speaking to each other about who God is or has been for us. You can put the PowerPoint up now if you want. So, there are over 200 names for God in the Bible. I'm sure there's more like 300, but you know, as you count, there's more and more and more. But there's many more than 200 names for God in the Bible. God saying, I am, or people calling God something. And some of the more familiar ones we have are, God is my rock, my fortress, my shelter, there's shepherd, there's father, all these kinds of things that we're familiar with. And on top of all these rather proper names, and there's compound names with different names for different versions of the word God, there's also metaphors, which aren't actually names, but just like word images that are mentioned for God. And definitely referring to action. The action of God looks like something. And what a metaphor does, I should really have Shauna come here and talk about this, but Sally McFay has a wonderful book on parables, speaking in parables, and she talks about the role of a metaphor. And metaphor is basically, it's a word picture, and it joins two things that are unlike, and you have to think about how they're alike, right? So we say love is a rose. Well, that's not exactly a rose, but it is, but how? So immediately you're invited into considering, how is it like a rose? Because I know what a rose is. So you actually, in a metaphor, you go investigate the rose in order to get some clues about what love is like. So it helps you engage in something concrete to investigate something that is more abstract or unknown. And it's putting these two things together and saying, there's a similarity there, will you explore that? So that's what metaphors do. They open doorways, really, to know something in a new way. So we have lots of metaphors for God, and as is human nature and institutional nature, we have our go-to metaphors. So what are our go-to metaphors in the Western Church? God is Father, very much, yeah. God is King. It's another one right here. Shepherd, yeah. Some kind of ruler or sovereign.
Yeah.
Even warrior or conqueror. We have a message at Easter quite a bit, God conquering death. Some kind of conquering, victorious image. God the Creator as well. Now these are all metaphors, so in a way they explain something that God's doing, but they are not equal to God. God is more than. So what I've been doing lately is exploring some of the lesser known metaphors for God and saying, I want to broaden really how I think about God, because if you look at them, the metaphors that are very common in the church are mostly male, have to do with authority and power over, and control. So I think we need other pictures of God that are not reinforcing power and control and power over and maleness, because we've had quite a bit of that. Thank you very much. And it hasn't always served us well. So this is my invitation for us to consider, I'll basically focus on two metaphors, but we'll look at a bunch of them. Again, this is basically just inviting us to think more broadly and find some more connections for how God can be present to us. Oh, someone on that PowerPoint. Good for you. So, God as a gardener. We find this in Genesis 2. The Lord planted a garden in Eden. John 15, where it says, I am the true vine, the Father is the vineyard keeper. So, linked to farming and gardening there. John 20, Mary sees the risen Christ but mistakes that for a gardener.
Yeah.
And so there's a ringing back to the Garden of Eden as well there, but in that verse for God as a gardener, which is a very kind of nurturing, growth, patient kind of image. God as a seamstress or a tailor. So this comes from Genesis 3, where God made clothing for the human beings. And also Matthew 6, we have God dressing the grass in the field, which is both gardening and tailoring or seamstress. God is a mother bear. This comes from Hosea. This is actually pretty striking image. It says, I will fall upon them like a bear robbed of her cubs, and I will tear open the covering of their hearts. So it's a fierce image, protective image, saying nothing will come to harm my cubs. I will do harm to you before you will harm my cubs. So it's a very strong, fierce image, protective image. And then we get a much gentler image, mother-like image, in God as a mother hen. Jesus speaks about this in Matthew 23, saying, long to gather all the chicks, bring them back to me. It's very more protective and come back to me in some way instead of going off and getting into trouble. So it's a gender image of a mother. God as a chef. Psalm 23, you know that, I will prepare a table. And I think, well, who does that? A chef. Preparing a feast for people. Yeah. And just to say, some of these metaphors I got from, there's an excellent Theo Ed talk by Dr. Lauren Winner, and she talks about this a lot, so you can listen to that as well if you want. God is a cheesemaker. Now this is not, who likes cheese?
Yeah.
Most people. Anyway, this is not, this is Job saying, God, I feel like I'm the curds and you're making cheese out of me. So it's not a pleasant metaphor necessarily. But the end result is, we get cheese. Even if we feel like we're the ones being pressed and made cheese out of it, yeah. God is a pregnant woman. This one comes from Dr. Lauren Winner, when she said, you have this, Jesus saying, my flesh and my blood are food for you. And she said that only makes sense in a pregnant woman because she is actually feeding her child.
Yeah.
I've never seen that before. And I thought that is actually true. We always think of it, well, we're not cannibals really, but we can't explain that metaphor. Well, we can actually. A pregnant woman goes, been there, done that. So yes, God is a pregnant woman. God is a giant tree, Hosea 14. So you can just look outside and go, there's a clue there about who God is to me. Look at a giant tree that was there before you were born and will be there after you die, because trees live long, long lives. God is a giant tree. God is a mourner. This comes from the book of Jeremiah, and it's present in other ways where God is mourning over the sad state of people, towns, cities, just that things are not going well for them, or they've walked down bad paths. So there's mourning. God is a mourner.
There's one there that's different. It's God is due.
Oh, yeah, changing. Testing you. Yeah, God is due, also from Hosea 40. You come like dew in the morning, and I think. So every morning there's a reminder that's while we were sleeping, some refreshment, nourishment has happened. And it's very delicate as well. And then it's gone and you don't see it. There's clues there for who God is. So this morning, That's just a taste. I mean, go read your Bible. There's just so many. But I want to focus on two this morning. And again, we're just going to consider them together. I'm going to offer a little bit of information that I found or thoughts that I have. But I'd welcome your reflections on it as well, because it makes it the picture fuller for all of us. So the first one is God as a midwife. And this comes from Psalm 22, which is actually the psalm that Jesus prays when he's dying. And we all know the first words. He says the first words, but many people think if he had had more breath, he would have said the rest of the psalm. He was invoking what happens in the psalm. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you left me alone? And the rest of the psalm is kind of this vacillation between I'm in horrible pain and suffering and feel alone, and remembering God has been with me in the past, and God will be with the future generations. But I'm in this present painful moment. So one of the things the psalmist does go back to the beginning and say, you are the one who pulled me from the womb, placing me safely at my mother's breasts. I was thrown on you from birth. You've been my God since I was in my mother's womb. This image of a very vulnerable time in life, a time when we're the weakest and the neediest, and God is a midwife, helping and protecting and making sure that the mother and the child are off to a good start. Margaret Gunther says, and she writes this book, it's from her book Holy Listening, the midwife is present to another. So midwife just means the with woman.
The with what?
With woman.
The with woman.
The with woman. So the woman who is with, which reminds us of other names for God, right? God with us. So the midwife is present to another in a time of vulnerability and working in areas that are very intimate. And it's a relationship of trust and mutual respect that happens in that moment, in that event. I have a quote from Ellen Hoffman. This comes from a podcast from Reclaiming My Theology, and she writes, we can read it together. The role of a midwife is someone who comes alongside. A midwife does things with the birth mother, not to a birth mother. She doesn't stand there and command the mother to give birth. There's no forcing childbirth to happen. She's gentle, attentive, guiding, partnering with the mother, listening for what the mother is feeling, what's going on in the body, imparting wisdom. Always concerned for the well-being of the mother and the baby to come. And then the midwife celebrates the new life that does come. There's a togetherness in mind, body, and heart. What would our relationship with God be like if that had been the primary image that we grew up with? So this is kind of a corrective, I see, in some ways, to many of the very dominating and commanding images of God that we have. Telling us what to do when we're quite passive, whereas with the midwife, it's not that you're being passive, it's that you're being helped through a very challenging journey, but you're doing the work. She can't do the work for you. One more quote, and then I'll invite your reflections. Like if this is sparking something in you, I'd love to hear it. God as a midwife honors your body, your thoughts, your feelings, your spirit. She doesn't separate them out. She knows that they are meant to function together in order to birth new life. So it's a very holistic, embodied way of being with. She's gentle and compassionate, walking alongside you, dedicated to the process. We don't have to do it alone. There's the with woman. So I'd invite you to, like, if this is bringing up any thoughts or questions or whatever, what do you think of when you think of God as a midwife? What comes up for you?
I think he's already had the training.
Had the training, so There's a trust that, I guess, yeah,
Yeah, I think it'll be right in there.
yeah.
He's already had the training. He did the course.
Did the midwife course,
Yep.
she knows what they're doing, yeah. You can trust them. That's good, thank you.
I think of how midwives adapt to each person. Yeah, they're very
Yeah.
attentive to the individual needs.
Adapt to each person, attentive to the individual need, that no birth is the same. Yeah, thank you.
You can do this. He cheers you on.
Cheering you on, you can do this, yeah. Good. Yes,
It speaks to me of like continual new birth, and I think the word I would use is becoming. Like if God's our midwife, it's this continual cycle of God just being right beside us and keeping bringing new life and new becoming into what's next.
yeah, becoming, so continuous new life, always happening, and it's always being supported, encouraged. I don't know quite the word I wanted to use here. Guided. Yeah.
Birth is really beautiful, but it's also extremely messy. So God's right there in the middle of the mess.
Yeah. Very beautiful but messy. So, yeah, the two words that kind of relate to this is intimate and messy. Yeah. Thank you.
I think we were thinking about the difference perhaps between a midwife and sometimes birth in other medical contexts where there's an impatience or a forcing or a intervention. And a midwife doesn't take the lead intentionally, really allows the mother's body to take the lead. And that is an embodiment of power that's quite subversive.
Yeah, good. So the difference, just noting the difference between like a medical procedure, if I can say that, and someone taking the lead from the mother's body and trusting that and going with that. So not trying to have power over what's happening, but really facilitating what's happening. I'm putting my words to it, but yeah. Thank you.
Doesn't take away the pain, but a continuing positive presence through the pain.
Yeah, not taking away the pain, but a positive presence through the pain. Yeah.
I had a really similar thought that life coming from pain and suffering and the cross, and then a witness to that. It's not an intervention of it, but a witness to it with a shared understanding of the purpose of that life coming from that suffering.
Yeah. That's wonderful. I might not be able to repeat it all, but a witness to the suffering and the life that comes out of that,
Yeah.
and not an intervention to stop the process,
No,
but to witness it.
witness with
Yeah.
an understanding of the beauty that comes from
Yeah. So beauty is being mentioned here, and witness, and not being coercive or controlling, but very much being with and helping what is already happening. Yeah. Anyone else before we move on to another metaphor? Yes.
Yeah, I heard you say that this is happening at the time when we're most vulnerable. And I was thinking the other time when we're most vulnerable often is when we're approaching death. And I'm thinking about this because my mom is with me, she's 93. And as I've been journeying with her, there's been a lot of, I guess it's like anticipatory grief because I'm just going to miss her so much when she goes. But there have been a few things that have happened recently that have helped me to see it, to not only to see it, but to experience it more as coming alongside. So the metaphor, I'm come up against the metaphor of the mother and the child, and then the midwife. So I guess what I'm saying is I'd love a little feedback on how to continue to respond to that invitation to be the midwife in this situation, which is a different thing than waiting for birth.
Yeah, so referencing another time when we're vulnerable, which is walking people towards when death is approaching, and how to anticipatory grief and how to midwife almost in that process.
It's a beautiful image, Lauren, thank you.
Yeah.
Midwife through to death. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, the next metaphor is God as a grave digger. Because really it's, I mean, you said it, it's these times when we are most vulnerable, the weakest, when we have the least to offer, is when we're firstborn and when we're approaching death. And this is when we need the most care and love, and we have nothing to offer back to people. And I think this is where the presence, the witness, is so important, to know that you are not alone in this. And this comes from Deuteronomy 34. And this God is speaking to Moses. This is the land that I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I promised. I will give it to your descendants. I've shown it to you with your own eyes. However, you will not cross over into it. Then Moses, the Lord's servant, died right there in the land of Moab, according to the Lord's command. The Lord buried him in a valley in Moabite country across from Beth Peor. Even now, no one knows where Moses' grave is. So I hear echoes here of the same thing we found in Psalm 22. This looking back to God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, where God has been guiding, leading these people, this present moment that we're in, which is kind of bittersweet for Moses, because he's not going in, and then looking forward to what future generations will say, look at what God has done, even though we don't get to experience that. So this past, we're in this present moment that is vulnerable, but we're looking at the past and looking at the future. And, okay, it was COVID. Who wasn't watching Netflix? I was watching Netflix. So I discovered this show, and I like reality shows or documentaries, as Shauna does. She was talking about that. But one show that I happened upon was called The Casketeers. Oh my goodness. Okay, if you haven't watched it, well, you may not like it, but it basically follows the owners and staff of Tiffany Funerals. This is in Auckland, New Zealand. And the owners are Maori, well, he's half Tongan as well. And they primarily serve the indigenous peoples in New Zealand. So it would be the Maori, the Tongans, the Polynesian Islands, Samoan, and they have all their own kind of funeral rites that they do. So you're learning about different funeral rites as you're watching this. And the people are very amusing as well. But the customs are different from our Western customs. So basically the funeral ceremony or ritual lasts about 3 days. And the first few days are just spent with the deceased and their body. And they're not to be left alone, so the family is there. It usually happens in like a courtyard, a public place, or it can happen in the home too, depending on the circumstances. And sometimes the family has no place to gather, so they'll have it in the chapel of the funeral home, and they provide mattresses, because people are just going to be sleeping there and being with the people for a few days. And some of the differences that you notice, in my experience, I have not had a good experience with funerals. From early on, I did not like funeral homes, I did not like funeral directors, I did not like any of this. Like, it just gazed at you know, dead body, right? And to see the respect and honor and care that these funeral directors give. They'll interview them, and Francis says, today we have in our care. And then he'll say the person's name and tell you a little bit about their life, and it's always in the present tense, because they believe that the spirit stays with the body for a little while, which is why you have 3 days of saying goodbye, because you think they're still present in some way, they haven't quite left us. And also thinking of birth and death, like these are almost the moments when we are most loved. Most wonderful things are said about us. We are so welcomed and so loved at these times. And a funeral director is just making space. They kind of just do the background work and step back and say, love well.
Good.
It's common to have a haka at the funeral. So, I mean, we're used to like very somber events. These can be noisy events. And they also say, do not withhold your emotions or what you're feeling. Like, say everything. They make speeches to the deceased. And they do the haka, and they will cry, and they will bring favorite items and place them in or on the casket. Like, there's so much of it is the witness, and not the, they're gone, I need to distance myself from this terrible thing. It's really seeing this is a transition, and how do we do this well and let them know that they were loved and the family all transitioned together in a way that, and they will keep honoring that person. The dead are always named in their gatherings as the same idea. This is, we look at the past, we're in this present moment, and we will be remembered in the future as well. So, I've had a change of heart about how I think about funerals. Instead of it being like, do I have to go? I don't like all of this, and I think, in another life, I think I maybe should have been a funeral director. But just being able to help and serve people, celebrate the lives of people that they have loved, and then paying them great respect. I mean, you see some of the mechanics of what they do, not everything, they're very discreet in what they show, but they say, oh, make sure she's straight, oh, comb her hair, we want to make sure she's lovely, we want her to look her best, just like she's at rest. And there's such respect given to, it's not a medical procedure, never, it is care, it is tender care. The other thing I hear him say over and over, the funeral directors, is when they're guided, especially when the coffin, and this is a picture of a Maori ceremony here. They're guiding them, because they tell them where to go, what to do, all of that. That's so that no one else has to think about that, basically. You can focus on what's important for that day. So he's guiding them, he's always saying, take your time, no hurry, no hurry. Imagine someone saying that to you for your life, every day. Take your time, no hurry, no hurry. Like, it'll all get done. We're just here to make sure that we're very present. So, the certain phrases that he said really stuck with you. And while they're carrying the casket, and they have to go upstairs, and sometimes they have to go through a window, because the tradition is you can't go through the door, you have to go through the window. So they're like lifting this casket up through this tiny window, and it's heavy, those guys, and he's talking to the casket, to the person, and he says, we got you, it's all right. There's this witness that I never got from any of the funerals I attended. It was always like, they're gone, instead of, we're with you.
Yeah.
So what comes to your mind when you think of God as a grave digger, or God as a funeral director?
He's probably been to the best schools.
He's probably been to the best schools.
Oh, been to the best schools, got all the right training, you can trust. You can Interesting. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what comes to my mind, and I love this show, but I'll tell you what comes to my mind is that we've done some very, very difficult funerals over the years for services for people who took their own life, or for loved ones who were killed in a terrible accident way too young. You know, so we haven't done that many because mostly our congregation was very young through the 30 years that we've existed. But we have done some, and what I've noticed is that God as funeral director is that every time we celebrate somebody's life, it's like there is a special kindness in the way that things work together, and the things that are said by people, the feelings that come, the songs. There's something that celebrates so beautifully that it's almost like a gentle fire, a ceremony of something beyond normal life that happens. I would say every time. You know, maybe I can think of one where probably the minister was a bit of an asshole, went a little bit too far and ruined the moment. But mostly I just think they've been so priceless with something that humans couldn't make happen without this infusion of beauty. Yeah. So God must care about each one and about what happens.
Mm-hmm. So a special kindness or grace appearing or being present at the funerals that you've done. Yeah. I like what you said last, that God must care about each person for there to be that beauty and kindness present in a way that we can't manufacture.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Other thoughts?
I'm curious about the honesty factor. I think I've struggled at a number of funerals where it wasn't so much kindness and care as just superficial niceties and ignoring trauma and violent behavior and toxic relationships. And so I'm curious about God as the one who brings honest care into transitions where there's been great harm done.
Yeah, and it's a good thought. Just a question about honesty at the funerals. Sometimes, I think it's more a Western thing where we're in denial a bit. You only say nice things as superficial. We're in honesty about harm that has been done by the person, or some, just things have happened in that person where it was a complicated life in some way. But then I think if we join that with the midwife and thinking of a very beloved child and what they grow up to be, you never know, and what harm they'll do and what great things they'll do. But at the end, I know some of the funerals, tragic deaths, terrible deaths, and the mother, or was it the grandmother, bringing the favorite blanket that she gave to the son, and that's what they put over the casket, saying, "It's still my son, it's still my grandson, still my beloved." Not dismissing difficult things, but just saying the witness isn't compromised in some way. Yeah, but that's an important question to ask.
I found in my life and the last couple of decades that metaphors have held my faith where other things did not. And the metaphors of nature. And death has been a scary thing. Recently I needed to face my own mortality, and I just found a peace and a return to the earth, because and that comfort and metaphors, I find the presence of God in returning home because of this idea I have about the presence of God within creation. So I really see that as a homecoming, and being there, welcoming back to home, to the greater expression of God in everything, and really a comfort, and where it's so scary, a comfort of just peace at home and reunion.
Yeah, thank you. So, just saying the metaphors of nature have held, or other metaphors maybe haven't for you. And instead of fearing death, it's very scary seeing it as a coming home. When you look at nature, you're returning to the ground.
So that grave digger
Yeah,
is, for me, and trying to turn, I mean, that's just so scary. It seems like the one with what do you call it? That, I'm sorry. The person, the Reaper.
oh, the Grim Reaper.
Reaper,
Yeah.
My first impression of that is,
Oh.
the Grim Reaper. But then, just changing that to, no, the one who cradles you back home, metaphorically,
Yes.
of course, but metaphorically for, a return to.
That's a really good contrast there, thinking of death as Grim Reaper and then changing that metaphor to one who's caring.
Almost
So
like
that coming,
cradling.
that homecoming, cradling, you said, yeah. Thank you so much. So my invitation today is to keep considering these things and notice them when we come on them, if we're reading the scriptures. Notice things we might not have noticed before. Because metaphors can carry so much. They're really big, big baskets. They can carry a lot if we take our time with them. So I'd like to, as I finish, invite us, again, participate as you want, to say prayers to God our midwife and God our grave digger. Just a sentence, if you want. What is a prayer that you would say today to God, either as midwife or as grave digger? God our midwife, protect us and the life in us, all the vulnerable places, the weak places, where something is just starting. Place us on nurturing breasts, on warm chests beating with love. Welcome us, celebrate us, and all the new starts and new beginnings that are before us. And God, our grave digger, with tenderness and care, help us to let go of things that are dying, whose time is done. Give us space to mourn to lament, to weep, and celebrate at the same time. To remember the good and the bad. Help us to look backwards and say, this is where we came from. This was all the hope and promise that we came with. And to acknowledge the present moment and its uncertainty and its pain and its good things too. And to look forward and go, they will remember. Future generations will say, God has done it. God our midwife, God our gravedigger, we welcome your witness in every stage and moment of this life. Amen.
This was beautiful. Thank you so much. So I guess we have a lot to think about today. Thank you so much. Boy, I just laughed when you said the Casketeers, because we were in New Zealand just before the year before the pandemic. Mary Ellen and I, and we had pastoral friends who had fallen in love with this show, and every night we binged on it to make sure that we saw the entire series before we left New Zealand, because we were sure we'd never see it again. So we did. They're about 20 minutes long or 22 minutes long, and so we did it every night, and we got home and it was on Netflix. But the characters are so priceless. It's Francis that you described as such a child, you know, he honors everybody so beautifully. That's what I love too. But you get to see his parts that haven't completely matured yet, and it has a lot to do with buying each new vehicle that could be a really shiny hearse. He's always, and his wife is going, they're such characters. One thing that's really funny, when the church falls into a very low place in history sometimes, and it's just an institution, sometimes people say all the church is for is to hatch, match, and dispatch. You know what I mean? It's baptisms and marriages and deaths. And then today I saw that in a complete reverse. Because I thought, oh my goodness, we get to be there for the hatching and the matching and the dispatching all the way through life. And God is in all of this. And what an honor that we sometimes get to be there too. Today, to sum up, I thought it'd be kind of fun to just sing the doxology together to close. So I'll do it this way. Oh, please stand. Stand and just imagine that the people beside you are infants and that you are. Probably wouldn't take this too far.
She says I'm an infant all the time.
Well, so you can midwife, you can doula. Yeah. You can just think about each dear person in our lives, and sometimes there's the mess of the situation, sometimes the intimacy, sometimes but also what we're longing for is always the gentle presence that helps to coax into new life. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise